I think the Lindsay Clancy case has killed the last bit of faith in humanity that I had, because a significant number of mainly American women have been driven insane because they seem to be projecting themselves onto this triple child murderer and trying to excuse her actions to ultimately remove any and all accountability for women writ large. And so we're going to explore the psychological maladies behind the Free Lindsay or Lindsay Did Nothing Wrong craze, which has raised over $1 million on her family's GoFundMe page, and has a bunch of women holding their children listening to her diary entries going, "Me too, Lindsay," implying they want to kill their newborn children. As if this is just a normal thing to be putting out on the internet. So, if you don't know, Lindsay Clancy strangled her 3 children, Cora, Dawson, and Callan, 5, 3, and 8 months old, with exercise bands in the basement of her family home in Massachusetts on the 24th of January 2023, while her husband was out of the house at her request, getting food and picking up her medication from CVS. And despite the video footage of him in CVS, despite the existence of a 911 call, which is too traumatic to release to the public, where he is wailing upon the discovery of his children, especially his son, when he keeps rocking his son's body, saying, my body," over and over again, there are multiple women on the internet blaming him for this, saying that he was the male voice that Lindsay Clancy heard in her head. Conspicuously, she only heard it that one time when she wanted to kill her children in a premeditated, planned act of murder with her husband out of the house.
All right, he did it. Patrick did it. Patrick's the one who did it. Not Lindsay. Patrick did it. Because, I also heard that women typically don't strangle. So awful to even say. But that isn't what a woman would do. They don't strangle. I was actually in therapy today, and my therapist and I were talking about it, and I said, well, what do they do? She said, well, they poison, or I said, oh, or drown them. Like, we literally had that conversation today. And she looks at me and she goes, he did it. I was like, wow, yeah. And now, yeah.
And they say, oh, he's got the eyes of a covert narcissist because they've imbibed psychobabble from Canva graphics on Instagram, and they think that they're the new Sigmund Freud.
Because when she woke up, whether or not she was drowsy, drugged, bloody, or whatever, she remembers in her head that he threatened that he was going to kill those kids in that basement. He told her the whole plan, because that's what a narcissist does. He wants to see the pain in her eyes, the fear in her eyes, to initiate this response.
The women who support Patrick Clancy and who are totally against Lindsay and think she's a monster are male-centered and given to red pill rhetoric bullshit. Those of us who have ever dealt with a narcissist or been in a domestic violence relationship can see right fucking through him. Like, the evidence is insane that it wasn't fucking her. She did not kill those kids and she did not try to herself. And nobody will ever convince me otherwise.
And despite him not being in the house, despite him having to go through the grief of losing his children, they're blaming him for this, as well as saying the astrological charts and vibes acquit Lindsay Clancy of any wrongdoing. And bear in mind, she's so evil, she chased her last child down because the poor kid saw what their mother had done to their siblings, and 2 had died immediately and 1 died on life support days later. Notable as well, the expert witnesses during the case say that she didn't make any inquiries into the well-being of her surviving child in the days following their murder.
But in that subsequent conversation that you were a witness to, where they were speaking on the phone and she told them about these voices or explained about the voices, did she ask about the kids?
She did not.
And in the days following her suicide attempt, which is conspicuous because she, yes, slashed her wrists, but they were so superficial they didn't need surgery. She took a cocktail of drugs that she had already procured via doctor shopping, because she was on a massive list of pharmaceutical prescriptions, which I'll just post here, which, again, nobody should be on, and people are saying this is sort of exculpatory circumstances, that she was on so many drugs that she was out of her mind. But okay, if she truly was insane, demented, did it in a fit of passion, did it because she was being spoken to by a voice in her head that was almost like demonic possession, then she wouldn't have ordered her husband out of the house, she wouldn't have orchestrated it all in an in an act of calculated, premeditated murder. Like, if you're genuinely insane, if you're like defecating on the subway and pushing 3 people in front of train tracks and, you know, folded over yourself with all of your limbs gone limp because you're on some sort of zombie-style fentanyl drug, then you're incapable of planning and executing this heinous a crime. So sorry, I don't even think the antipsychotic and anti-anxiety medicine, which she was taking while drinking, by the way, which you're not meant to do, alleviates her responsibility in this situation. Her suicide attempt resulted in her lowering herself out of a second-story window, and she landed so badly that she has been paraplegic ever since. So she didn't actually kill herself, even though one witness suggested that she attempted to kill herself because she didn't want anyone else raising her children in her absence.
Altruistic filicide is a term that's used that means killing your kids out of love, not because you're trying to be cruel or for material gain or because you want them out of your lives or any of that, but killing them out of love so that you could basically, they wouldn't have to suffer, so you could prevent their suffering. The second point is that, as I've said before, she didn't like to leave her children, whether that was for date night or school or going back to work or anything. She did not like to leave her children. And if she had taken her own life, then her children would have been without her, and she thought that they would suffer. And she'd been having these thoughts both about herself and about her children over a several-month period. When asked about what happened, is that in the course of strangling each child, she said, "Go to God, baby, go to God." And that was part of her expectation, that she and the children would be together in heaven with God. She was raised as a Catholic, and this, as I understand Catholic considerations, that's not necessarily what happens, but
purely vindictive. This is purely trying to control the lives and the fate of her children and her own fate, inflicting maximum damage upon her husband, who is now going through it because he is subject of speculation, character defamation, by a bunch of women who have been one-shot by social media and online conspiracies and true crime podcasts, whose lives are so boring that they want to turn someone else's misery into their daytime soap opera. Now, the Clancy narrative hinges on the idea that her postpartum depression mutated into anxiety and then into psychosis, and that she was too insane to be to blame for these heinous murders. Because bear in mind, the defense is not contesting that Clancy committed the murders. There's a bunch of, again, online sleuths and schizos who are saying that actually Patrick Clancy somehow committed the murders because she was wearing socks inside the house so she couldn't have left footprints or something. Instead, what the defense is saying is, by reason of insanity, she cannot be declared guilty. Thomas Saz was a critic of psychiatry in the 20th century, and he wrote a lengthy essay on how the insanity plea actually just exculpates people of moral responsibility. He was writing mainly about the Patty Hearst case, the heiress to the William Randolph Hearst newspaper fortune, who was kidnapped by a far-left terror group called the Symbionese Liberation Army in 1974 and found 18 months later, and she claimed she was brainwashed into committing armed bank robbery and building IEDs used in the attempted murder of police officers for the group. In 1976, she was convicted for bank robbery and sentenced to 35 years in prison, which was later reduced to 7 years, and her sentence was commuted by Jimmy Carter and pardoned by Bill Clinton, because of course, God forbid, we hold women responsible for some of the things that they do, and we'll get onto why lots of women don't want to be held responsible later. It's like the Jack Nicholson character in As Good As It Gets, quote, "How do you write such good women? I think of man and I take away reason and accountability." And there are evolutionary reasons for this, and, you know, we love our women, I love my wife, I love my daughters on the way. This is why it's inconceivable for me that someone could do this and not be held accountable for it. But Thomas Saz wrote in his essay, "What excuse is left? Only what used to be called temporary insanity, a concept that has become as unfashionable in forensic psychiatry as narrow ties have in menswear. Hence, being temporarily insane has been refashioned into being brainwashed. The defendant, according to this claim, was not really himself when he committed the illegal acts, or herself. He was really someone else, that is, his brainwashed self. Hence, his unbrainwashed self cannot be held responsible for these acts." That was Patty Hearst's defense. is also very similar to Lindsay Clancy's defense. The crucial question thus becomes, what is brainwashing? Are there, as the term implies, two kinds of brains, washed and unwashed? How do we know which is which? Actually, it's all quite simple. Like many dramatic terms, brainwashing is a metaphor. A person can no more wash another's brain with coercion or conversation than he can make him bleed with a cutting remark. If there is no such thing as brainwashing, what does this metaphor stand for? It stands for one of the most universal human experiences and events, namely, for one person influencing another. However, we do not call all types of personal or psychological influences brainwashing. We reserve this term for influences of which we disapprove. In other words, brainwashing is like perversion, as the latter term refers only to those sexual activities that one disdains, so the former refers only to those educational or psychological influences one abhors. While she was with the SLA, Patty Hearst was no doubt influenced by her captors and associates. Hearst, F. Lee Bailey, the press, and nearly everyone else calls this brainwashing, because the time of her arrest, when she identified herself as an urban guerrilla, and her appearance in court as a demure and dutiful daughter, Patty Hearst was no doubt influenced by her captors and associates. No one calls this brainwashing. In short, trying to ascertain whether Patty Hearst had been brainwashed by having her examined by psychiatrists is like trying to ascertain whether holy water is holy by having it examined by priests. Terms like brainwashing and holy water are invented and deployed strategically by these very experts for their own purposes. If we really want to understand what holy water is, we must examine priests, not water. If we really want to understand what brainwashing is, we must examine psychiatrists, not brains or criminal defendants. What then are the psychiatrists doing at the Hearst trial? They're testifying for whoever pays them. More than 300 years ago, an English aristocrat defined an ambassador as an honest man sent abroad to lie for his country. I, Thomas Saz, would define a forensic psychiatrist as an honest doctor sent into court to lie for his masters. We have done away with canon law and no longer look to priests to tell us about the purity or pollution of the soul, but we have substituted it for mental hygiene law and look to psychiatrists to tell us about the purity or pollution of the brain. So what Saz was saying was, if you go to a psychiatrist whose stock and trade is diagnosing mental illnesses and dispensing pills so they can get paid, especially in the United States, then you're no doubt going to get diagnosed with the most severe psychological malady, which then provides you with antipsychotic drugs, which turns you into a lifelong patient for the pharmaceutical industry, which then exculpates you of wrongdoing when you do great evil, because you can say, I was a victim of the pharmaceutical lobby, or I was a victim of misdiagnosis, or I actually have this condition, and therefore I'm not responsible for anything that I do because I'm a poor oppressed victim of my own psychology. This has stripped us of the ability to talk about evil. We have substituted the language of good and evil, as was understood by the traditional religion of the West, which is Christianity, for psychiatry, the therapeutic language of the state and the law, which will argue that we aren't actually responsible for evil because it's actually quite difficult for us to countenance that someone could do this of their own volition, especially against their own children, because we wouldn't do it ourselves, or most of us right-thinking people wouldn't do it ourselves, but we'll get onto the people that would in a moment. And so instead, we chalk it up to some temporary illness or malady of the mind, which can be rectified with hospitals, antipsychotic drugs, therapy, and a sort of general cultural sense of well-being and understanding. This is why the Lindsay Clancy case has turned into quite an egocentric circus of other women projecting their feelings onto Lindsay Clancy and saying, well, if I were her, I would do the same thing because of postpartum depression. You just don't understand how severe postpartum depression is. Now, it is. I understand that it's very difficult for women to go through, that it must be horrifying to have your body feel like it's robbed of its agency, and that, I mean, as a man, if something falls off, I'll tape it back on. My body does basically everything I want it to do until I'm struck down with man flu, and that's just debilitating. It takes me out for a week. Whereas for women, you have periods and childbirth and all these strange ailments that you'll go to a doctor and insist that the symptoms are real, but the doctor won't be able to identify it. So women often have these conditions that they describe and give labels to, even if they can't be neatly identified or categorized in a medical box. Point being, lots of women will identify with Lindsay Clancy's postpartum depression, and it is increasing because it's not just cesarean sections, which are becoming more common, especially in America, which rob the body as it's going through labor of the natural hormonal processes that make you bond with your baby, that make you almost forget the pain and difficulty of pregnancy and labor so that you're encouraged evolutionarily to have it again. But also the epidural numbs your ability to produce those hormones as well. So it's not just the actual removal of the baby via C-section, it's the anesthetic methods that they use to numb the pain of childbirth. All these things have made childbirth easier, but there have been unforeseen hormonal and psychological complications that have come about because of it. And so yes, lots of women have a really difficult time during birth and afterwards, and so I'm sympathetic to that, but my sympathy ends at your saying that you would therefore have a right to kill your children, or that you feel like doing harm to your child because you're in such psychological distress because of the pains of childbirth. And you go as far as to excuse the behaviour of a multi-child murderer because, as one woman said in the crowd gathering outside the courthouse wearing pink in solidarity with Lindsay Clancy, it could have been me, it could have been any of us.
You know, one of my sister-in-laws, it could be one of my best friends, and it could be me. So just here to support.
We are hearing her. We see that she tried everything. And I really do believe that she went into a state of psychosis.
I feel like the system failed her. She was begging for help and no one was there. I don't know if us being here will make her feel any better, but I mean, she's living in hell right now.
But also, some of this postpartum depression, or the psychological distress that Lindsay Clancy claims that she was having, and I have no doubt that she is a disturbed individual, doesn't stop her from being evil though, is partly both her own fault, but also, yes, the fault of a larger financial and cultural system which encourages women to divorce themselves of dependence on men. Bear in mind, Lindsay Clancy had a wider support network than most women have access to, because Patrick Clancy was earning like $400,000 a year, they had a very large house, he took time to work from home, he took paternity leave, so he was present. Lindsay Clancy's mother was around to help out with the childcare, and also Patrick Clancy paid for a nanny. So she had fewer stresses on her hands than many women do. However, she took on additional stresses, because when she gave birth to her third child, which was Callan, on the 26th of May 2022, she demonstrated no signs of postpartum depression, according to her mother. She only started to feel anxious when she returned to work 2 months after giving birth because Callan wouldn't take to the baby boss. Yeah, of course you're feeling anxious being separated from your newborn, especially when he might not feed in the natural way that human beings have managed to do for many years. And of course, there are some babies that don't take breastfeeding. Again, it's very difficult. I understand that women will have those fears and those anxieties. But it isn't right that women should be encouraged, especially in the States, to go back to work only a couple of months after having their children. And it's not just that this was pushed upon Lindsay Clancy. Lindsay Clancy asked her mother to take over childcare duties because she said going back to work would really help with her anxiety. So she identified herself with her career. She was a nurse. I'm sure there are lovely nurses out there, I've met some, but nurses as a profession do have a reputation of being kind of crazy, and it's not for no good reason. And clearly, her anxiety was made worse by her separation from her child. And again, she didn't need to go back to work because her husband made $400,000 a year. That's well above the American average. They had a massive house in Massachusetts. They could afford things. It was essentially a, I don't want to lose my identity to being a mother thing that she was doing. And I'm sorry, but your children should come first. This is the case for men. They just express their ability to make sacrifices for their children by providing for the children and the mother who they would like to stay home and raise their children and inculcate their values, their religion, their way of life into their children rather than farming them out to some anonymous professional caregiver in a state institution that might indoctrinate or abuse them. And a quick side note on that as well. As a Christian, I do find it distasteful that Patrick Clancy has already forgiven Lindsay Clancy for killing his 3 children. In the same way that I found it distasteful that Erica Kirk said that she forgave Tyler Robinson for shooting Charlie Kirk. And that's because it's not our place to forgive people of such evil, actually. In the Christian framework, it would be the place of God to decide whether or not he forgives those sins. Now, you know, our sins are pebbles in the eyes of the mountains of God's mercy, as is said. But therefore, it's not our place to determine what should and shouldn't be forgiven. In fact, the injunction in the Bible is, repent, go forth and sin no more. So you need to make restitution for your sins, repenting, before you are forgiven by God. And so, if that's the standard for God, it should be the standard for us. And funnily enough, I don't think Lindsay Clancy has repented of her wrongdoing, not just because she is claiming I shouldn't be held accountable because I was insane, despite 2 different psychiatrists saying that she only heard voices in that moment and hasn't before or since, but also because during court, she tried to call on an expert witness who was a nurse, who also has a TikTok, and so is feeding into this kind of like TikTok mass psychosis subculture that's grown up around the case, just by virtue of posting to the platform. And when this was rejected, I mean, just look at her facial expressions. This seems someone who has been scorned, feels entitled to have that witness present, and feels like she is frustrated that she isn't being allowed to spin the narrative that she is insane and therefore shouldn't be held accountable, without being challenged. So, I'm sorry, but this person doesn't exactly command much sympathy from me. Not just because of what she's done, but because of how she behaved both before and after the murders. After the birth of her third child, she deteriorated rapidly between November and December 2022 and was committed to psychiatric institutions in January 2023. She was also given the wrong medication and over-medicated. So again, I'm not saying the psychiatric profession has played no role in exacerbating this woman's problems, but I am saying that unlike Candace Owens' suggestion, that she is 100% not guilty and that this is all Big Pharma's fault, I am saying that just being on psychiatric meds does not stop what you have done from being evil. And let's say, for sake of argument, she was totally out of her mind. Okay, that means she, and everyone like her, needs to be locked in a box forever, or given the death penalty, given what she's done, but that's impossible in Massachusetts, for the sake of her soul and the rest of society. And so allowing her to get away with the insanity plea is just a way of allowing culprits of the most horrible, evil crimes to get away with literal murder because the state considers itself one great big insane asylum to therapeutize all of us towards, like, perfectible human nature, and it considers immorality to be a deterioration from source from that perfectible, egalitarian human nature caused by poverty or injustice or oppression or some sort of chemical imbalance in the brain which can't be replicated in follow-up studies. This video is sponsored by Rumble Wallet. Britain is fast becoming the Soviet Union, where everything you say or buy online is being watched for potential wrongthink, and despite the Constitution, my friends across the pond in the United States aren't faring much better either. That's why libertarian nerds invented crypto, so you can have a say over your funds and what you spend them on. After the 2008 financial crash, Bitcoin was designed to be an alternative to banks, so that you couldn't be debanked, have transactions denied, services withheld, or funds put on hold. If you've ever been refused a bank account because you're a politically exposed person, you know how frustrating that is. Which is why the guys at Rumble have developed Rumble Wallet, to simplify your crypto transactions and make sure you remain uncancelable. You can use Bitcoin, dollar-backed stablecoins, or even digital gold backed by real gold. It connects with MoonPay, which is registered with the Financial Conduct Authority. So you can safely link your debit card, credit card, or bank account and be ready to use it within minutes. And for a limited time, you can start your Rumble Wallet with $20 in US stablecoin. You can use that to tip your favorite Rumble creators, like me. Just enter my exclusive promo code Connor20 when you sign up. Rumble ensures we all have a platform to speak about the threats facing our respective countries without the fear of cancellation. They're good guys, and if they weren't doing the right thing, I wouldn't be working with them, so thanks to them for sponsoring this video. Download Rumble Wallet, try it for yourself, and remember to use my code Connor20 for $20 in US stablecoin to tip to your favorite creators. Restrictions apply, there are a limited number of entries available, terms and conditions also apply. See the description below or visit rumble.com/promo-official-rules for details. And if you want to get all of my content without ads, you can subscribe to my Substack for as little as £5 per month. It's linked down in the description, and it's also where I'm posting exclusive essays and updates. Now let's get back to the video. And all of this excuse making is being driven by a cult of delusional, I would say quite dangerous, women online. We've had a litany, a deluge of TikToks of women saying that Lindsay Clancy didn't really kill her kids, it was the husband's fault. Lindsay Clancy couldn't have killed them because her forensic astrology charts said that Leos don't kill their cubs, but Geminis do, and her husband's a Gemini and she's a Leo, and for some reason we should take the word of woo-woo crystal women over the confession of Lindsay Clancy, her diary entries that say she wanted to kill her kids, the forensic evidence, the trauma endured by her husband, all the psychiatrists that say, yeah, she was having intrusive thoughts about harming her children, and it seems like that voice in her head was just another in a series of consecutive thoughts that she chose to act on, so she chose to do it, and made her husband go out of the house so he couldn't see it and stop her. So this was clearly premeditated and evil. But hey, go off, look at the stars, you do you. Some of them are hanging out of windows to prove that she was pushed rather than jumped. Some of them are going so far as to accuse or insinuate that Patrick Clancy and all of the authorities around the case are in on some weird child abuse cult and they're all covering for one another. Genuinely, like, the what John Doyle calls the retard right, the sort of schizo conspiracy theory side of what used to be the political right, combined with the fevered accusations surrounding the Epstein files of ritual child sacrifice, consumption of excrement by ex-presidents, like red torture rooms, killing people in front of one another, that detracts from the actual accusations of, an international financial and ethnic patronage network that was screwing over multiple countries and trading in secrets, and also had a penchant for teenage girls. All of that has sort of combined and struck like a lightning rod the Lindsay Clancy case, and it's mainly bored housewives and suburban moms who have not much going on in their life, and who have like a zero barrier to entry to these sort of diary-style confessionals online, and who think that there are very little consequences for them showing their solidarity to Lindsay Clancy, or relating their experience to one of the most heinous crimes in recent years. And so this just torrent of nonsense is just being spewed online, and you can only imagine how, like, Patrick Clancy feels. He's since remarried. God knows how he's maintaining that relationship, given the horror that he's experienced. But do you think he's not aware of this? Do you think he's not aware that he's being scapegoated for his children's own murder after finding their bodies in the basement? Do you think he's not aware of how there are millions of dollars being raised, thousands of women showing their support for his children's killer? Do you think that he isn't being tortured by this stuff? Are you trying to drive the guy to meeting the same end that his wife, like, half-heartedly attempt to do? And a lot of this is because there are a series of unhinged women on the internet who pass this low barrier to entry, universalize their own personal experiences, their personality defects. We live in a cluster B society where even not maladjusted people, in order to seek validation and attention on social media, will conform to like BPD personality traits online. A lot of these women are projecting their own unhappiness onto the general female experience and all men. And there are women online saying, well, why aren't men standing up and saying that Lindsay Clancy is innocent and that Patrick Clancy clearly didn't support his wife? And if all men aren't standing up for Lindsay Clancy, they're complicit too.
Has anyone else noticed how men seem very quiet about the Lindsay Clancy trial? Why is that? Why are men not standing up for her when the evidence is showing more and more that Patrick did it? I feel like there's like bro code that you don't speak out against abusive behavior. Like, it's seen as weak. And at this point, if you're a man saying like she should just go to prison, she did it, Patrick's innocent, leave him alone, he was a great dad, with all of the evidence that's coming out, if you are saying that about Patrick still, I'm just going to assume that you are abusive. I'm just going to assume that you are a piece of shit husband too, and that you condone and support and enable abusive behavior, because it's so obvious if you were watching the case that he, at the very least, was abusive to her and neglectful. Like, where are all the good men? All of my trauma has come from men. I have spent so much of my life healing from men. I've always needed a dad, a husband. I'm just waiting for some man out there to prove to me that there's some good ones.
No, actually, that's not the case at all. And I would want to be far the fuck away from somebody like you who is going to drag insane people into my life, or is going to excuse your own terrible behavior as the subject of external forces, make my life miserable. For guys out there that are looking for wives, be an impossible person to live with and be quite a dangerous influence on your children, and also sabotage your female friends' prospects of having healthy relationships themselves, because you're discoloring their worldview by making them apprehensive of all men in light of a woman murdering her own children. Some of them are even saying she should have killed Patrick instead of the kids.
If I've learned anything from this trial, it's that if I was Lindsay Clancy, I would have killed my husband, not my children.
You people are demented. Like, fully evil. And again, I don't want to be one of those people who says Lindsay Clancy was demonically possessed, because I don't think she was. I think that voice in her head is just an excuse, and I think it was another intrusive thought saying you should harm the children after all the other intrusive thoughts that said you should harm the children, and she decided to act upon it. But these people, I mean, if there were candidates for people that are demonically possessed, well, this would be the, pardon the pun, legion of people trying to excuse this evil to ensure that more of this will happen again. And in light of the Lindsay Clancy case, whether or not these acts were inspired by the case, I'm sure there will, unfortunately, be acts that will be inspired by Lindsay Clancy's example going forward. But at the same time, there are multiple headlines coming out of women torturing their children, pouring hot wax on them performatively on camera. There are women, there's like some cheerleader who decided to kill her infant son because she was under a lot of stress. And there was another woman who killed a bunch of kids and told her ex-boyfriend, I'm going to slit the kids' throats because you mistreated me, like an act of insane psychotic vengeance. There was another woman who got into an argument with her husband after seeing porn on his phone and shot herself and the children. We have forgotten that there is a capacity for female evil. We spent all this time saying women are the future and women are wonderful and the force is female and all of this stuff. We forgot that women have the capacity and have throughout history to kill their own children. And even though men are responsible for the vast majority of murders, that is only if you remove abortions from the statistics. And quite perversely, in the same month that the Lindsay Clancy case is being heard in court, Massachusetts just legalized abortion up until birth. So if you compare the abortion statistics to the murder statistics, women also have the capacity for cruelty towards innocent life. It's the same with sudden infant death syndrome. If you break down SIDS by ethnicity, whether or not the mother drinks and whether or not the mother was on any kind of medication or had a psychological condition at the time, it seems to evaporate. And it's because it seems like plenty of women are killing their children, phoning the emergency services and going, oh my god, my baby just stopped breathing randomly. Yeah, it's because you were either drunk and rolled over on him in the night because you behave irresponsibly, or because you were shaking the baby, or suffocated the baby, because you didn't want to take responsibility for the being whose existence you were responsible for because they only came into the world through your choices. And it's this resentment of an innocent child who has no say over who their parents are, has no say over when they're born, when they're conceived, who they're brought up by. It's this resentment that a disturbing number of women are just projecting out over TikTok because they are playing audio of Lindsay Clancy's diary entries read out in court and going, oh my god, same Lindsay, as they're cradling their newborn children, implying that they just want to harm and kill their own children. Now, I don't say this lightly. All of those children should be taken away from those women for their own safety. And how disturbing must it be to have your mother film TikToks of herself saying that she basically wants to kill you or resents having you at the very least? When you grow up and see that, do you not think that's going to screw up those children's lives? Sorry, but lots of people, and I'll say women here because they're more predisposed to do it, but plenty of people writ large are just ill-suited for social media because they will confess to horrible thoughts on the internet that they should be talking about to a priest in a booth and allowing to exit their body, hang in the air, and just disappear, never to be acted upon. But instead, on social media, your words, written or spoken on video, are like inscribed on tablets of stone. And so once you externalize these thoughts, it becomes part of the collective internet hive mind, and it creates a permission structure for these behaviors. Because rather than you confessing it, as you would to a priest, to go back to Thomas Sands' metaphor, and being absolved of your sins, and being told, okay, here is your acts of penance, go forth, sin no more, become a better person. Instead, you just put it out into the world, other people copy you because they see that it gets attention, either through sensationalism or because lots of people feel this way, and then you have this feedback loop of affirmation, and you're told that this is an acceptable thing to think and feel. And so there is a permission structure for the worst kinds of behaviors, and an incentive to knock down all standards, all stigmas, all barriers to immoral behavior, up and to including killing your own children, because, as one woman said, it might be me. And you've got loads of women as well, setting up their camera, performatively weeping into the toilet, throwing ice, beating the door with pillows, doing these like toddler tantrums, tearing at clothes, being performatively angry. And a lot of this is female catharsis because women feel things more deeply than men. They feel them in their whole body. Sometimes they just have to get that out. But it's cringe and embarrassing to do it with a camera set up, with your light, with your ring light, all that stuff. But it's also unhealthy because it inspires other women to do the same thing. And very suggestible women, especially women who drive social contagions, like trans, like cuts for Bieber, like bulimia and anorexia, and the pro-Anna content on Tumblr in the 2010s, those women are susceptible to and participate in social contagions, and so that social contagion will end up with someone being a copycat Lindsay Clancy. No child deserves that. No child deserves their mother saying that they're thinking about harming them on the internet, let alone being the subject of that socially permissible harm. And what if one of these people is on the jury? Last week, the jury had to be stopped and questioned for unknown reasons. What if we have a female version of O.J. Simpson on our hands, where the women on the jury vote to acquit Lindsay Clancy because, again, they think, oh, it could have been me. And I don't want to be judged by anything I do, so I have to make sure nothing can be judged, including killing your own kids. There are some people that genuinely think like this. And I'm sorry, we just can't have a civilization like that. Or at the very least, we can't have a civilization that says that women deserve all the same rights and opportunities as men. Women have the exact same cognitive capacity and free will and agency as men. But also, women can't be expected to take accountability for their own actions because they're just subject to the whims of mental health episodes or hormones or bouts of suggestibility. Like, we can't have, at the same time, women must have maximal agency, but also can't be held to account when they do something wrong. We are going to have to revisit that conversation if you keep insisting that women cannot be held to moral standards when they kill their own children because she's just a girl, teehee. And even conservative women are doing this. You got Tiffany Smiley, some Fox News pundit, saying that her heart breaks for Lindsay Clancy. Notably not the children or the husband who's just lost his children. You had Hannah Cox getting ratioed and community noted because she wrote a massive article saying that Patrick Clancy was a man who failed his wife and kids. He didn't grow up, lead, or take responsibility for his family. He was a man who wanted kids and who allowed his wife to sacrifice her body to produce them, but didn't make sacrifices to care for that body when it needed help as a result. Okay, he paid for a nanny. He ensured that her mother was around the house to help out with housework and childcare. He earned $400,000. He was providing for his family. He seems to have loved his kids. You're just sick in the head and looking for clout, and she still hasn't retracted after getting proven wrong on this. Is just blocking anyone who disagrees with her. And you've got Kristen Hawkins, who's like an anti-abortion campaigner, complaining about Matt Walsh's post, saying that lots of people probably go through postpartum depression because it's difficult to make the transition in our individualistic, hedonistic, consumerist society from just thinking about your wants and needs to having one, or, in our case, very soon, two full-time dependents who disrupt your sleep, are very demanding, and who you have to sacrifice your entire life to take care of, because otherwise they literally die without you. She responded to Matt Walsh saying, "Woke right men haven't figured out that they're partaking in identity politics with their victim mentality and mean tweets. Get out of your little podcast studio, take off your loafers, touch grass, and go hunting. Then, try tell me how men should be leading the culture fights. Meanwhile, us ladies, conservative women, will continue to hold down the fort here, online, as we breastfeed our babies while making our sourdough bread and participating in our office conference calls." And you had Tommy Lahren going around saying, "This is how the right loses women." All of this is done in the context of a woman murdering her children. You are making the discourse about you, saying the right will lose women if it refuses to pander to a group of crazies on TikTok that say she shouldn't be held accountable for killing her own kids. Can you, dear God, just not make everything about you for once? This is the political equivalent of the guy takes image of thing, woman takes image of thing obscured by her fucking face. This is egocentric and evil because you are obscuring one of the worst crimes committed in recent years, the butchering of children. This is what Candace Owens has been doing for ages, by the way. Candace Owens, who has made her show entirely about who killed Charlie Kirk, anyone other than the guy that confessed to doing it, whose prints were found at the scene, whose gun was found at the scene, who was on pretty clear CCTV walking around with a rifle in his pants, who confessed to his trans furry lover over text and with a written note, whose parents turned him in. All of these things. No, instead it's Mossad, people in maroon shirts, beekeepers, and psychic time travelers who commune with giants in underground bunkers. This entire thing is just manufactured drama to deliver an emotional high to bored women. It's a bit like the insight from Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground when he's talking to the prostitute that he's trying to wife up, when he says that some women will just start a fight with their husbands to check if they still care about them enough to match their emotional hysteria, because the opposite of love isn't hatred, it's boredom, apathy. This is them sort of inducing an emotional hurricane at which they are at the eye, and seeing if anyone will pay attention to them when they just sort of kick a hornet's nest on social media. This is Candace Owens making Charlie Kirk's murder about her. This is women making the murder of Lindsay Clancy's children about themselves. It is pure narcissism via social contagion. And it's driven largely by social media. Dave Green runs an Exxon podcast, had the insight recently where we are stuck in an infernal hellscape of one giant female group chat. And that is why all internet discourse feels stale. It's why people will lock themselves in political silos and just repeat these mantras over and over again, like trans women are women, trans rights are human rights, or even on the establishment right side, saying that there is no affordability crisis, or this country gets to be a country while yours is a multicultural economic zone. All of these things are the consequence of social media. It is the consequence of it being a transmission vector for social contagions. And it is not healthy. And so you have this coalescence of forces, this emotional high, this amateur sleuthism driven by true crime podcasts, the idea that the truth is actually out there, and that any official narrative is that's substantiated by evidence is fed slop. I don't doubt this was driven by COVID, by the way. I think a lot of people got one-shotted by lockdown, because we were actually lied to repeatedly during COVID about lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccines, transmissibility, all of these things. We just repeatedly lied to by the state, and it's demolished social trust and trust in any institution, which, don't get me wrong, there's very good reason to be skeptical of the institutions. I was on the television all the time during COVID saying, be very skeptical. But this has now created like a preference cascade in favor of disbelieving everything that can be backed up by logic, facts, and evidence. This is the idea that there is always a secret narrative to everything. There is always a hidden culprit behind it. You're going to get your Katniss Everdeen moment where you shoot President Snow and free all the oppressed people and do-do-do-do. It's the equivalent, like the female equivalent, of Arnold Schwarzenegger killing Killian at the end of The Running Man, sending him down that rocket into the advertisement and kissing the hot Hispanic girl, and the rock song plays over the end. You're not going to get your Running Man moment, okay? You're not going to get your, I reveal everything, I'm a truth teller, I am a citizen journalist and a sleuth moment about Lindsay Clancy. You're not going to get it. Because she is guilty, she is evil, and everyone trying to make excuses for her is participating in that evil and making it more likely to happen again. Finally, this is a consequence of some women martyring themselves to their own lifestyles. We revisit this conversation about female agency. If you don't think that you can be held accountable for your choices, maybe you shouldn't make choices. Now, I'm not making that argument, but that is the logical consequence. That's the only sustainable solution to saying that women can't be held accountable for the evils that they do. And a lot of these women will undoubtedly be complaining about choices that they made. The family they chose to have, the lifestyle they chose to have. Like Lindsay Clancy, the anxiety they've induced in themselves by defining themselves by a career, separating themselves from their children and going back to that career. Again, I understand there are financial pressures that force plenty of women to go back to work and have an undesirable childcare arrangement that is terrible for the kids. I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about Lindsay Clancy and some of the women that are pathologizing this on TikTok. They have decided to pathologize their dissatisfaction with their own life choices, their lack of perspective and gratitude for the sacrifices that their husband makes, the fact that they feel stressed and overwhelmed by housework and childcare and potential out of the homework, and so they'll martyr themselves to their own lives, and they'll create a victimhood narrative which obscures the fact that they chose this, and actually they should be grateful, many of them, for the relative fortune that they choose to live in. It's not that life isn't stressful, it's not that things couldn't be better, it's not that the economy isn't being mismanaged, it's not that people aren't eating terrible food, and they aren't over-medicated in many circumstances, but compared to the suffering of our ancestors, they lose that perspective. And so, lots of this is women deciding to say, woe is me, and because they feel emotionally stressed, they think, well, if this gets worse and worse, I could end up in Lindsay Clancy's situation, and so I sympathize, and so we need to exculpate her of moral responsibility in case I end up in the same situation. And Lindsay Clancy was doing this too, because the wine tumbler she was drinking out of while she was on benzodiazepines and other antipsychotic and antidepressant medication, which is a terrible concoction for mental instability, the wine tumbler says because of the kids. As in she was blaming her children for why she drank. She had this mentality too. Do not lock yourself in this mentality. Do not succumb to martyrdom over your own family, ingratitude that morphs into contempt. As for the social media social contagion, I think this is going to keep getting worse until it gets better. I think it's going to have severe political consequences. It's already done incalculable damage to the political coalition that won Trump the White House in 2024. It's already discredited a large number of political figures, not just over this particular charade, but other issues. And I think lots of people have become addicted and driven to the point of psychosis by overexposure to other people's opinions that they haven't vetted for credibility. And even in some instances, like recursive relationships they formed with AI that just feed back what they want to hear to them. They've had like ChatGPT-induced psychosis. So all of these things are going to continue getting worse. And I wish I had better news, but all you can do is find people around you that don't fall for this stuff. Insulate your family from others. Make sure you are grateful for them. Cut off these noxious external influences. And make sure that if you're in a relationship with one of these women that sympathizes with Lindsay Clancy, do what some people have reported doing and end it quickly. Because you cannot trust that woman to raise your children. The major decision you have to make in your life is who, as a man, you are going to get married to and have children with. And if you cannot trust them to sacrifice everything in gratitude to ensure those children's well-being, as you are also expected to do as a man, then you just cannot get into a relationship with that person. Thank them for doing their vetting for you. But a significant number of women have fallen for this stuff, and it's pretty bleak knowing we have to share countries with these people and these women can vote. So it might be worth revisiting the conversation on the differences between the sexes, how men and women process emotions, the responsibilities that the majority of women are expected to handle when it becomes too stressful for them, and whether or not a culture which has strangers confessing to their innermost thoughts performatively on social media and throwing ice at a bathtub rather than caring for their own children is a good idea.